At 10:46 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, January 3, 2026, President Donald Trump gave a single order from a draped-off room at Mar-a-Lago. The words were simple: good luck and Godspeed. Within hours, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro would be blindfolded wearing a gray tracksuit aboard the USS Iwo Jima. The most audacious American military operation in Latin America since 1989 had just reshaped the Western Hemisphere, and nobody saw it coming. Not like this. This is the story of Operation Absolute Resolve. Here is what we know happened. In the early morning hours of Saturday, January 3rd, residents of Caracas woke to explosions. Aircraft roared overhead at altitudes that shook windows. Fire erupted at Fuerte Tiuna, Venezuela's largest military complex. The lights went out across large sections of the capital. By the time dawn broke, the president of Venezuela was gone, captured, flown out of the country he had ruled for 13 years. President Trump, speaking to reporters later that morning at his Florida residence, called it one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might in American history. Whether you agree with that assessment or not, the operation itself was unlike anything the world had witnessed in decades. Let me walk you through what happened. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, provided a detailed timeline during the press conference. More than 150 aircraft launched from 20 different bases across the Western Hemisphere. The weather had been a problem for days. Rain and cloud cover over Venezuela forced delays. But on Friday night, a break in the weather opened a narrow window. Only the most skilled aviators in the world could have navigated through it. Those were Kane's words. The helicopters carrying the extraction force flew at approximately 100 feet above the water as they approached Venezuelan territory. Their target was a fortified compound inside Fuerte Tiuna, where Maduro and his wife were sleeping. Before the extraction team could land, American forces had to neutralize Venezuela's air defense systems. According to Trump himself, the lights went out across the country. Every radar installation, every surface-to-air missile battery, disabled. The operation was designed to be overwhelming, fast, and precise. Maduro and his wife tried to reach a steel-reinforced safe room when they heard the commotion. They did not make it. Delta Force operators reached them first. The entire extraction took just over 2 hours from the moment Trump gave the order to when Maduro was aboard the American warship. Trump watched the whole thing unfold in real time on screen set up at Mar-a-Lago. If you would have seen what happened, Trump told Fox News, "I watched it literally like I was watching a television show." The speed, the violence. It was an amazing thing. But how did we get here? This operation did not happen overnight. The pressure campaign against Maduro had been building for months. As early as August 2025, the CIA quietly inserted a small team into Venezuela. Their mission was to provide what officials called extraordinary insight into Maduro's movements, where he slept, what he ate, where he traveled. Even his pets were known to American intelligence. The agency built a psychological profile that would guide every aspect of the operation's planning. Elite troops trained for months using a full-scale replica of Maduro's compound, constructed based on intelligence gathered inside Venezuela. The military buildup was equally deliberate. The USS Gerald R. Ford, America's most advanced aircraft carrier, arrived in the Caribbean in late 2025. Additional warships followed. Trump believed the growing naval presence would send a message. A lot of ships out there, he noted during the press conference. The administration described it publicly as a counter-narcotics operation. Navy vessels intercepted suspected drug boats in the Caribbean Sea. Coast Guard cutters seized oil tankers allegedly violating sanctions. Each action tightened the noose around Maduro's regime. But behind the scenes, the end game was never in doubt. Multiple officials have now confirmed that regime change was always the objective, despite public statements to the contrary. Several Democratic senators accused Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth of lying during a briefing just weeks before the strike. Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey wrote on social media that both men looked every senator in the eye and said this was not about regime change. Kim said he did not trust them then, and the operation proved his suspicions correct. Trump himself made one final attempt at a diplomatic solution. About a week before the strike, he called Maduro directly. "You got to surrender," Trump recalled telling him. According to Trump, Maduro came close to accepting, but in the end, the Venezuelan leader stayed put. He gambled that the United States would not follow through. That gamble cost him everything. Now let me explain why this matters beyond the headlines. Venezuela sits on 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. That is approximately 1/5 of the entire world's crude oil supply, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than the United States. The country is a founding member of OPEC. But here's the critical point. Venezuela currently produces less than 1 million barrels per day. That is a fraction of what it produced before Maduro and his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, took power. International sanctions, economic mismanagement, and crumbling infrastructure have gutted the industry. Pipelines have not been updated in 50 years. The cost to restore peak production would exceed $58 billion, according to PDVSA, the state oil company. Trump made no secret of his intentions. At the Mar-a-Lago press conference, he announced that American oil companies would go in, spend billions of dollars, and fix the badly broken infrastructure. We built Venezuela's oil industry with American talent, drive, and skill, Trump declared. And the socialist regime stole it from us. The president said the United States would operate Venezuela temporarily and sell its oil to other nations. The proceeds would go partly to the Venezuelan people and partly to the United States as reimbursement for damages caused by the regime. This is where the situation becomes complicated. Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was appointed acting president by the country's Supreme Court within hours of Maduro's capture. Trump initially suggested she was willing to cooperate with Washington. She is essentially willing to do what we think is necessary to make Venezuela great again, he said, but Rodriguez's own statements contradicted that characterization. She demanded proof of life for Maduro and his wife. She denounced the operation as a violation of international law. She called it an attack on Venezuelan sovereignty. The Venezuelan military, at least publicly, has fallen in line behind Rodriguez. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez endorsed the Supreme Court ruling and urged citizens to resume normal activities. But the question of who actually controls Venezuela remains deeply uncertain. Hardline Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello released a video showing himself surrounded by armed police, condemning American imperialism. He remains at large and could become a rallying point for regime loyalists. Then there is the opposition. Maria Corina Machado, the Venezuelan opposition leader who won the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize, celebrated Maduro's capture. "The time for freedom has come," she wrote. She called on the military to recognize Edmundo González Urrutia as the legitimate president. González, remember, is widely believed to have won the July 2024 election before Maduro manipulated the results. But Trump dismissed Machado's leadership potential. "I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader," he said. "She does not have the support within or the respect within the country." That statement stunned many observers who expected Washington to back the Democratic opposition after removing the dictator. So where does that leave Venezuela? The country now has an acting president appointed by a court controlled by Maduro loyalists, an opposition leadership operating largely in exile, an American president claiming he will run the country until a proper transition occurs, and no clear roadmap for what happens next. Analysts are drawing comparisons to the 1989 invasion of Panama that removed Manuel Noriega. The parallels are striking. Both operations targeted Latin American strongmen accused of drug trafficking. Both were framed as law enforcement actions rather than traditional military interventions. Both resulted in the target being brought to the United States to face criminal charges. But there are crucial differences. When George H.W. Bush ordered the Panama invasion, the United States already had over 10,000 troops stationed in the country. Southern Command headquarters sat on Panamanian soil. American forces could guarantee a transition and install a new government within days. In Venezuela, there is no such infrastructure. The USS Gerald R. Ford is impressive, but it is floating offshore. A smash and grab operation can remove a head of state. It cannot govern a nation of 28 million people. Venezuela also presents a far more complex challenge geographically and demographically. The country has 7 times Panama's population and 12 times its landmass. Mountains, jungles, coastlines. Maduro's party apparatus is deeply embedded in Venezuelan society in ways that Noriega's military dictatorship never was. The regime has had decades to infiltrate every institution, every company, every school. Removing the head does not eliminate the body. The international reaction has been swift and sharply divided. Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Uruguay, and Spain issued a joint statement expressing profound concern and firm rejection of the military action. They called it an extremely dangerous precedent for peace and regional security. Brazilian President Lula da Silva condemned the strikes as crossing an unacceptable line. Colombian President Gustavo Petro deployed military forces to his country's border, preparing for potential refugee flows. He condemned the attack as aggression against all of Latin America. But several right-wing governments in the region celebrated. Argentina's President Javier Milei hailed Maduro's capture as a victory for freedom. Ecuador's President Daniel Noboa called it a blow to narco-Chavista structures. El Salvador's Nayib Bukele signaled support on social media. The hemispheric response reflects a deep ideological divide that the Venezuela operation has only sharpened. Beyond Latin America, the reaction has been equally intense. China condemned the strikes as a flagrant violation of international law and demanded Maduro's release. Russia called it an unacceptable assault on Venezuelan sovereignty. Cuba labeled it state terrorism. Iranian officials expressed outrage. All four countries have maintained close ties with the Maduro regime and now face uncertainty about their investments and interests in Venezuela. Trump has not limited his rhetoric to Venezuela. Speaking aboard Air Force One on Sunday, he described Colombia as very sick and its president as a sick man who likes making cocaine. Asked whether the United States would pursue military action against Colombia, Trump replied, "It sounds good to me." He said Cuba looked ready to fall. He suggested something would have to be done about Mexico. The threats have raised alarm across the region about whether the Venezuela operation represents the beginning of a broader campaign. Now let us address the legal and political questions. Democrats in Congress have condemned the operation as illegal. The president did not seek congressional authorization before launching the strikes. The War Powers Resolution requires the executive branch to notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying armed forces into hostilities, but the resolution has been routinely ignored or sidestepped by presidents of both parties for decades. Courts have generally declined to adjudicate disputes between the legislative and executive branches over war powers. The criminal case against Maduro appears on firmer legal ground. He was indicted in 2020 on charges of narco-terrorism conspiracy and cocaine trafficking. The new superseding indictment, unsealed, Saturday adds weapons charges and alleges that Maduro partnered with the Sinaloa cartel, Colombian narco-terrorist groups, and the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua to flood the United States with cocaine. Prosecutors claim the conspiracy enriched Maduro, his family, and senior Venezuelan officials over more than 25 years. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced that Maduro would face the full wrath of American justice on American soil in American courts. Maduro arrived at Stewart Air National Guard Base in New York on Saturday afternoon. He is being held at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. His arraignment is scheduled for Monday in Manhattan Federal Court before Judge Alvin Hellerstein. The legal precedent here is instructive. When Manuel Noriega challenged his prosecution in the 1990s, he argued that his capture violated international law, that the invasion of Panama was unlawful, and that he enjoyed head of state immunity. He lost on all counts. Federal courts held that the manner in which a defendant is brought before an American court, even by force, even from foreign soil, does not defeat criminal jurisdiction. Maduro's attorneys will almost certainly raise similar arguments, but they face an unfavorable legal landscape shaped by decades of precedent. The more interesting question may be Maduro's treatment during detention. Noriega eventually won prisoner of war status, which entitled him to certain privileges, including wearing his military uniform and being housed separately from other inmates. Whether Maduro pursues a similar strategy remains to be seen. Let me give you 3 scenarios for what might happen next. Best case, Delcy Rodriguez proves willing to negotiate a genuine transition. The opposition and regime elements reach a power-sharing agreement. Free elections are scheduled within the constitutional framework. American oil companies begin investing in infrastructure rehabilitation. Venezuelan refugees start returning home. The country slowly rebuilds under international supervision. This scenario requires extraordinary diplomatic skill, sustained international support, and cooperation from actors who currently have every incentive to resist. Base case, a prolonged period of uncertainty and fragmentation. Rodriguez maintains nominal control, but lacks legitimacy. Regional power brokers carve out zones of influence. The opposition remains divided between those willing to work with remnants of the old regime and those demanding complete lustration. American attention drifts to other priorities. Oil investment stalls amid legal and security concerns. Venezuela limps along without clear direction for years. Worst case, the regime's remaining hardliners refuse to accept Maduro's removal. Armed resistance emerges. Criminal organizations exploit the power vacuum. Refugee flows accelerate, destabilizing neighboring countries. The United States faces pressure to deploy ground forces to maintain order. What was supposed to be a surgical operation becomes a protracted occupation. American casualties mount, public support collapses. Venezuela becomes this generation's quagmire. Which scenario unfolds depends on decisions that have not yet been made by actors whose intentions remain unclear. But the stakes could not be higher for Venezuela, for the region, for American foreign policy, and for the principle that sovereign nations should be free from military intervention. Here is what you should watch in the coming days and weeks. Monitor the Venezuelan military. If senior commanders begin defecting or refusing orders from Rodriguez, the transition could accelerate. If they remain unified behind the regime remnants, expect prolonged instability. Watch the opposition. Can Machado and Gonzalez return to Venezuela safely? Can they build a coalition that includes moderate Chavistas willing to switch sides? Their ability to mobilize supporters will determine whether the democratic alternative has any traction. Follow the oil companies. Chevron has operated in Venezuela for nearly a century. Its response to the new environment will signal whether serious investment is possible or whether the political risk remain too high. Pay attention to American domestic politics. The Venezuela operation is unfolding in a midterm election year. Public opinion could shift rapidly depending on how events develop. If the transition goes smoothly, Trump will claim vindication. If it descends into chaos, Democrats will have a powerful issue and track the regional response. If Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico coordinate opposition to American policy, the United States could face a unified front in the hemisphere for the first time in decades. That would have implications far beyond Venezuela. One final thought. 36 years ago, almost to the day, American forces invaded Panama and captured Manuel Noriega. That operation is now remembered as a success, at least in conventional terms. Panama transitioned to democracy. Its economy grew. The canal remained open. But Venezuela is not Panama. The challenges are larger. The stakes are higher. The path forward is far less clear. What happened in the early morning hours of January 3rd, 2026 will be debated for years, decades perhaps. Was it a necessary intervention to remove a criminal dictator or an illegal act of aggression that violated the sovereignty of a fellow nation? The answer may depend on what comes next. Operation Absolute Resolve achieved its immediate objective. Nicolás Maduro is in American custody, but the harder work of building something better has only just begun. The question now is whether anyone has a plan for that. There is another dimension to this story that deserves attention: the human cost. Venezuelan authorities have not released official casualty figures from the strikes, but reports are emerging. Linda Unamuno, a public worker in Caracas, described an explosion so powerful it destroyed the roof of her house. Even hours later, she was still crying. She had to flee with her daughter to a neighbor's home in the middle of the night. It was really traumatic, she told reporters. I would not wish it on anyone. An official speaking anonymously to the New York Times estimated at least 40 people were killed in the attacks. That number could rise as rescue workers access damaged areas. Trump said Saturday that some American forces were injured during the operation, but none were killed. The Pentagon has not provided additional details. The speed of the extraction, just over 2 hours from order to completion, suggests that resistance was minimal. Whether that holds as regime loyalists assess their options remains to be seen. For the millions of Venezuelans who fled their country during the Maduro years, the news brought an overwhelming mix of emotions. 20% of Venezuela's population has left since Maduro took power. That is roughly 7 million people scattered across Latin America, Europe, and the United States. Many gathered in public squares in Miami, Madrid, and Santiago to celebrate. Videos showed crowds waving Venezuelan flags, singing the national anthem, embracing strangers. But celebration is tempered by uncertainty. Nurka Melendez, co-founder of a group that assists Venezuelan asylum seekers in New York, described her reaction as a roller coaster of emotions. There are still political prisoners in my country, she said. There are still people feeling fear, yet there is at least a light at the end of the tunnel. The political prisoners she mentioned number in the hundreds. Human rights organizations have documented systematic detention of opposition activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens who dared to challenge the regime. Whether the new government, whoever ends up leading it, will release these prisoners remains an open question. Regime loyalists still control the judiciary, the security services, and much of the bureaucracy. They have every incentive to protect their own by maintaining control over the levers of state power. There is also the question of accountability. Maduro faces federal charges in New York, but what about the ministers, generals, and party officials who enabled his rule? Diosdado Cabello, the interior minister, is named in the new indictment along with Maduro's son and other senior figures, but most of them remain in Venezuela. Will there be a broader effort to bring them to justice? Or will they be offered immunity in exchange for cooperation during the transition? These are the kinds of messy compromises that often determine whether post-authoritarian transitions succeed or collapse into renewed conflict. The economic dimension is equally daunting. Venezuela's economy has contracted by approximately 75% since 2013. Inflation reached millions of percent annually at its worst. The currency is essentially worthless. Public services have collapsed. Hospitals lack basic medicines. Schools struggle to function. Rebuilding will require not just investment, but institutional reform at every level. That kind of transformation takes decades, not months. And then there is the geopolitical fallout. China has invested billions of dollars in Venezuela through loans for oil arrangements. Russia maintains military and intelligence ties with Caracas. Cuba depends heavily on Venezuelan oil. All three countries condemn the American operation in the strongest terms, but their practical options for response are limited. Still, the precedent troubles many observers. If the United States can unilaterally deploy military force to seize a sitting head of state, what prevents other powers from claiming the same right? The norms being eroded here protect everyone, including Americans serving abroad. The United Nations Security Council is scheduled to meet Monday at Colombia's request. The meeting will likely produce condemnations, but no binding action. The United States holds veto power. But the diplomatic damage accumulates regardless of whether formal resolutions pass. Secretary of State Marco Rubio addressed some of these concerns on Sunday. The conversations with Rodriguez are delicate and complicated things, he said. Our goals remain the same, but he declined to specify what those goals are beyond vague references to freedom and democracy. Trump's threat to take further military action if necessary adds another layer of uncertainty. He said the military is prepared to strike again, but that he does not think it will be necessary. That caveat offers little reassurance to Venezuelans wondering whether more explosions could shatter their nights. It offers even less to neighboring countries watching American power projection with a mixture of awe and alarm. The comparisons to Iraq in 2003 are inevitable, even if imperfect. The Bush administration toppled Saddam Hussein with overwhelming military force, but it had no coherent plan for what came after. Trump has explicitly rejected the idea of prolonged entanglement. We are not looking to stay, he said. But the logic of intervention has a way of overriding initial intentions. Once you remove a government, you own the consequences. The Venezuela operation also raises profound questions about American democracy itself. The Constitution grants Congress the power to declare war. That power has been steadily eroded over decades as presidents of both parties have expanded executive authority. Trump did not consult Congress before launching strikes that could reshape an entire hemisphere. Whatever one thinks of Maduro, this should concern anyone who believes in constitutional governance. Some Republicans have defended the operation as necessary and justified. Senator Tom Cotton called it a long overdue action against a narco-terrorist regime. Others have been more cautious. The debate will continue in the weeks ahead. But the precedent has been set. A president can launch regime change operations in the Western Hemisphere without asking permission from Congress. That power, once claimed, rarely gets surrendered. Let me know in the comments what you think happens next in Venezuela. Will this become the next success story or the next quagmire? Subscribe if you want to follow this developing situation. The consequences of what happened this weekend will unfold for months and years to come, and we will be here to cover every development.